I was stranded in a snowstorm for 9 hours. Called Mom. Can you get the kids? She sighed. I'm watching your sister's dog get groomed. Call an Uber. $340 Uber. That night, I took them off my life insurance, my house, and my phone plan. 3 years later, Mom texted, "Your dad had a heart attack." I replied, "My mom said she couldn't pick up my kids during a snowstorm because she was watching my sister's dog get groomed." I called a $340 Uber. That night, I removed her from my life insurance, my house deed, and my phone plan. 3 years later, she texted me, "Your dad had a heart attack." I replied, "Sorry, I'm busy. Call an Uber." She didn't think it was funny. Neither did I when my kids were stranded. I'm going to tell this story in numbers because the numbers are the only part of it that doesn't lie. 9 hours stranded. 11 degrees outside. 23% battery. 12 minutes from the school to my mother's house. $65 for a dog grooming appointment. $340 for an Uber to save my kids. $85 per month for the phone plan I was paying for her. $280 per month for the grocery delivery I was sending to her house. $67,200 in total financial support removed over 3 years. One sigh? That's the number that started everything. One sigh on a phone call during a snowstorm that told me everything I needed to know about where my children and I sit on my mother's list of priorities, which is below a golden retriever named Bella. My name's Joel, 34M. 2 kids, Mason who's 9 and Lily who's 7. My wife Dana was in Frankfurt for work, a 2-week consulting project that she'd been preparing for since October, and she left on a Sunday, and the snowstorm hit on a Wednesday, and I was on I-94 coming back from a client site in Grand Rapids when the highway turned into a parking lot at 2:47 p.m. Not slowed down. Stopped. Dead stopped. Semi-jackknife it across 3 lanes about 2 miles ahead, and behind it. Every car on the interstate just sat there. Engines running, wipers going, the snow coming down so thick that I couldn't see the taillights of the car in front of me from 30 feet away. The temperature was 11 degrees. My gas gauge was on the last bar. And my 2 children were sitting at Bright Horizons after-school program 14 miles away, waiting for someone to pick them up before the 6 p.m. hard close. Let me explain what a hard close means at Bright Horizons, because it matters. 6 p.m. is not a suggestion. It's a policy. If your child is not picked up by 6 p.m., they charge $15 per minute for the first 15 minutes. After 6:15, they call the emergency contacts on file. After 6:30, if nobody has responded, they're required by state licensing regulations to contact Child Protective Services, CPS, for an unpicked up child. It's not optional. It's the law. And my kids were sitting in that building with their backpacks and their coats and their after-school snack wrappers and no idea that their father was frozen on a highway and their mother was in another country and the clock was ticking toward a phone call that could put our family into a system that doesn't care about snowstorms or traffic or the fact that you tried. I called everyone I could think of before I called my mother. I want you to know that. She was not my first call. She was my last resort, and the fact that your mother is your last resort tells you everything about the relationship without me saying another word, but I'll say the words anyway because the details matter. I called my friend Andre first. Andre lives 20 minutes from the school. He didn't pick up. I found out later he was in a meeting with his phone off. I called my neighbor Diane. Straight to voicemail. She was visiting her sister in Ohio that week, which I'd forgotten because I forget things when I'm watching my gas gauge die on a frozen highway. I called my coworker Pat, who lives in the area. Pat was stuck on the same highway, different exit, same storm, same parking lot of cars going nowhere. 3 calls. 3 dead ends. My phone was at 23% and dropping because the cold drains batteries faster than normal use, and I'd been running Google Maps trying to find an alternate route that didn't exist. I called my mother at 4:52 p.m. I remember the time because I was staring at the clock on my dashboard and doing math, the kind of math you do when your children are 14 miles away and the clock is running, and the number that matters most is the number of minutes until 6 p.m. and the number of minutes you have left of phone battery, and those 2 numbers are both shrinking and the gap between them is your margin of error, and your margin of error is a child's safety. My mother, Carol, lives 12 minutes from Bright Horizons. 12 minutes. I've driven the route. I've timed it. 12 minutes in normal conditions, maybe 18 in snow. She was the answer. She was always supposed to be the answer. That's what grandmothers are. That's what emergency contact means. She's been on the school's emergency pickup list since Mason started kindergarten. She picked up on the third ring. I could hear music in the background. Not the radio. Salon music. The kind of soft acoustic playlist that plays in waiting areas at places where you sit on leather chairs and flip through magazines, while someone else does something that costs $65 and takes 45 minutes. I said, "Mom, I'm stuck on I-94. The highway is completely shut down. I need you to pick up the kids from Bright Horizons before 6. And she sighed. A sigh. One exhale. Maybe 2 seconds long. But in those 2 seconds was every piece of information I will ever need about my mother's priorities. It wasn't the sigh of concern, the kind you make when someone tells you something worrying. It wasn't the sigh of inconvenience, the kind you make when your plans change unexpectedly. It was the sigh of annoyance. The sigh of a person who is comfortable and settled and does not want to be disrupted. I heard leather shift in the background, the squeak of her adjusting in the salon chair, and she said, "Honey, I'm at the groomer with Bella. Your sister asked me to watch the appointment. Can you call an Uber?" Bella, my sister Megan's golden retriever. A dog. My mother was sitting in a dog grooming salon watching a golden retriever get shampooed and blow-dried, 12 minutes from a school where her grandchildren were waiting to be picked up in a snowstorm. And her suggestion was to call an Uber. From a frozen highway. For 2 children. In a blizzard. I said, and I could hear my own voice cracking. Not from emotion but from cold because my car heater was losing the fight against 11 degrees. "Mom, please. If nobody picks them up by 6, they're going to call CPS. I'm not being dramatic. That's the policy. They'll call Child Protective Services." My mother said, "Oh, don't be dramatic. They're not going to call CPS over a snow day." "They absolutely will. It's not a snow day. It's a state licensing requirement." I said, "Mom, the groomer is 4 miles from the school. You could drop Bella off and be there in 15 minutes. She said, "I can't just leave in the middle of the appointment. She's already on the table." She, the dog, was already on the table. And that was the end of the conversation. Not because she said no definitively, but because the sigh had already said it, and everything after was just punctuation. The after-school program called me at 5:38 p.m. Second call. A woman named Trish who I'd spoken to many times at pickup and who always smiled at Mason and called Lily Sweet Pea. Trish wasn't smiling now. I could hear it in her voice. She said, "Mr. Brennan, we're 22 minutes from close and we haven't been able to reach anyone on the emergency contact list." Because the emergency contact list had my mother on it, and my mother was watching a dog get blow-dried. I said, "Trish, I'm arranging something right now. Please give me 10 minutes. She said, "We can give you until 6:15. After that, I'm required to make the call." The call. CPS. 10 minutes. 23% battery. My sister Megan was at home during all of this. I found that out later. She was at home, on her couch, 35 minutes from the school, but 25 minutes from the grooming salon. She could have driven to the groomer, picked up Bella, and freed Mom to get the kids. She could have driven to the school herself. She had a car. She had no children of her own. She had nowhere to be. She chose to do nothing. Because nobody in my family suggested it. Because my emergency has never been anyone's priority. Because the operating system in this family processes my problems as optional and everyone else's as urgent. I called an Uber from the shoulder of I-94 at 5:41 p.m. Search pricing. Winter storm. Limited drivers. The estimate came up on my screen. $340. $340 for a ride from Bright Horizons to my house. I stared at the number. I thought about the $65 dog grooming appointment. I thought about the 12 minutes between my mother and my children. I thought about Trish and the 6:15 deadline and the 3 letters that would follow if nobody showed up. I authorized the charge. $340. The Uber driver, a man named Dimitri who deserves more credit in this story than anyone who shares my DNA, picked up my 2 kids from the after-school program at 5:58 p.m., 2 minutes before hard close. Mason and Lily got into a stranger's car because their father couldn't be there and their grandmother chose not to be. Dimitri drove them home. They arrived at 6:34 p.m. The house was dark. The key was under the mat, which is a security decision I'd normally never make, but which I'd arranged via text with 11% battery and shaking hands while sitting in a frozen car on a highway that smelled like exhaust and fear. I didn't get home until midnight. The highway reopened at 9 p.m. after the semi was cleared and the plows came through, and I drove the remaining 60 miles at 30 miles per hour in silence. No radio, no phone, just the sound of tires on wet road, and the heat finally working and my hands slowly unclenching from the steering wheel. When I walked through the front door, Mason and Lily were asleep on the couch, still in their coats, shoes still on, backpacks on the floor next to them. They'd fallen asleep waiting for me. The neighbor, Mrs. Chun, had come over at 7:30 after she saw the house lights on and knocked and found the kids alone. She'd made them grilled cheese. She'd turned on a movie. She'd stayed until they fell asleep and then locked the door behind her and texted me. Kids are safe. Federal asleep. You owe me nothing, but I'd accept a thank you when you get home. Mrs. Chun, a woman who owes me nothing, who is not on any emergency list, who noticed lights on in a house that should have been dark and checked. She did in 15 minutes what my mother wouldn't do in 12. I carried Mason to his bed first. Then Lily took off their coats and shoes, pulled the blankets up. Lily half woke up and said, "Daddy, a man drove us home." A man, not Grandma, not anyone they knew. A man named Dimitri in a Hyundai Sonata. I said, "I know, baby. I'm sorry." She said, "He was nice," and fell back asleep. I stood in the hallway between their rooms and I leaned against the wall and I closed my eyes and I breathed for about 3 minutes and I felt something that I can only describe as the structural failure of trust. Not a crack, but a collapse. The kind that happens when a weight-bearing wall is removed and the entire building shifts. I sat at the kitchen table at 12:47 a.m. My kids were asleep. The house was quiet. The snow had stopped. And I opened my phone and I looked at 2 numbers side by side on my bank app. A $340 charge from Uber, timestamped 5:41 p.m. and a $65 charge from Precious Paws Grooming Salon on my mother's linked account, timestamped 3:15 p.m. She was still on my family phone plan. I could see her charges. $65 for a dog. $340 for my children. Those 2 numbers, sitting next to each other on a screen at 12:47 a.m., told the whole story better than any sentence anyone in my family has ever said. I made a list, on a piece of paper, at the kitchen table, with a pen that was almost out of ink. Life insurance beneficiary, remove Carol Brennan. House deed emergency contact, remove Carol Brennan. Phone plan, cancel Carol Brennan's line, $85 per month, paid by me for 3 years, total value, $3,060. Kids school emergency contacts, remove Carol Brennan. Monthly grocery delivery to parents' house, cancel, $280 per month. Streaming bundle on my account, Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus cancel, $42 per month. Everything she was receiving from me. Everything I was quietly providing because that's what good sons do. They subsidize their parents' comfort without being asked and without being thanked. And the total, when I added it up at 1:15 a.m. with an almost dead pen and hands that still had the cold stored in them from 9 hours on a highway, was approximately $5,892 per year, times 3 years of continued support before the snowstorm. $17,676 in value I'd provided to a woman who couldn't drive 12 minutes to pick up my kids. I made every change within 72 hours. Quietly, without announcement, without confrontation, without a single phone call or text message explaining what I was doing or why. I logged into the insurance portal and changed the beneficiary. I called the property management company and updated the emergency contact. I went to the phone carrier's website and removed her line. I canceled the grocery delivery service. I canceled the streaming accounts. Piece by piece, thread by thread, like pulling the stitches out of something that was never going to heal properly anyway. The phone plan was the first thing she noticed. About 3 weeks later, her service just stopped. She called me from a landline, confused, not angry yet, and said, "My phone isn't working. Did something happen with the plan?" I said, "I restructured my plan." That's all I said. She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means your line is no longer on my account." Pause. Since when? Since last month. Pause. Why? And I said nothing. I just let the silence sit there the way her sigh sat on the phone during the snowstorm, occupying the space where an answer should have been but wasn't. She said, "Joel?" I said, "I have to go, Mom." And I hung up. The grocery delivery stopped the same month. She texted me, a week after the phone call, from Megan's phone because hers was now on a different plan she'd had to set up herself. "Did you cancel the grocery order?" I replied, "Yes." She said, "Why?" I said, "Restructuring." Same word. Same flat delivery. Same nothing behind it. She didn't push. Not yet. The streaming went next. Dad called about that one. He said, "The Netflix isn't working." I said, "I canceled the account." He said, "Why would you do that?" I said, "I'm cutting expenses." He said, "You make 6 figures." And there it was already. The sentence that would come back 3 years later in a very different context. You make 6 figures. Like my income is a family resource. Like earning well means I'm obligated to fund entertainment and groceries and phone service for a woman who couldn't drive 12 minutes in a snowstorm. Megan found out about the changes before Mom understood the full picture. She called me and said, "Mom says you canceled a bunch of stuff. What's going on?" I said, "I made some financial decisions." She said, "Is this about the snowstorm?" First time anyone named it. I said, "What do you know about the snowstorm, Megan?" She said, "Mom told me you were upset that she couldn't pick up the kids." Couldn't. She said couldn't. Not wouldn't. Couldn't. Like there was a physical barrier between my mother and my children and not a dog grooming appointment. I said, "Your dog was getting blow-dried while my kids were almost reported to CPS." She said, "Mom was doing me a favor watching Bella. You can't expect her to drop everything." Drop everything. Sitting in a chair watching a dog get shampooed is everything. Driving 12 minutes to pick up grandchildren in a snowstorm is dropping it. I said, "Megan, you were home that night." She went quiet. "You could have driven to the groomer and gotten Bella so Mom could get the kids. Or you could have driven to the school yourself. You have a car. You have no children. You were 25 minutes away with nothing to do." She said, "I didn't think it was that serious." I said, "My kids were on a porch in the cold for 20 minutes because the only adult who showed up was a neighbor who noticed the lights were on." She didn't respond. I said, "My daughter got into a stranger's car because her grandmother was watching your dog. Think about that." I hung up. Let me tell you about Bella, because Bella is a character in this story whether she knows it or not. Bella is my sister's 4-year-old golden retriever. Bella goes to the groomer every 6 weeks, $65 per session. Bella goes to the vet for quarterly checkups. Bella has a wardrobe of seasonal bandanas. Bella has a stocking at my parents' house at Christmas. My mother has photos of Bella on her refrigerator. 3 photos. Bella in the snow. Bella at the beach. Bella wearing a birthday hat. My children's school photos are not on the refrigerator. I looked for them the last time I was at the house, which was 4 months before the snowstorm, and they weren't there. Bella's were. Mason and Lily are not on the fridge. A golden retriever is. That's not a metaphor. That's a magnet arrangement. 3 years passed. I pulled back completely. Not with a speech. Not with a dramatic exit. Just a quiet, systematic dismantling of every connection point. No holidays at my parents' house. No Sunday dinners. No birthday visits. No favors. No emergency availability. No being the person who shows up and fixes things and writes checks and asks for nothing in return. I built a self-sufficient life with backup plans that didn't include my mother. Mrs. Chun became the primary emergency contact at school. Andre became the backup. Patricia from church joined the rotation. 3 people who would drive 12 minutes in a snowstorm without sighing, none of them sharing my DNA, all of them having proven it through actions, not obligation. Mom noticed the distance gradually. The phone plan was first, and she set up her own with visible confusion, like a person who's been receiving a service so long they forgot it wasn't automatic. Then the grocery delivery stopped, and she had to start buying her own groceries, which sounds absurd to type, but that's the level of subsidy I'd been providing. $280 a month in delivered food to a woman who couldn't drive 12 minutes for her grandchildren. Then the streaming died and Dad called about Netflix. Then Christmas came and I didn't show. The kids and I had Christmas at home, just the 3 of us, and I cooked a turkey that was too big, and we ate leftovers for 4 days, and the kids didn't ask why we weren't at Grandma's because they'd stopped asking about Grandma months earlier. That's the detail that tells you everything. They stopped asking. Not because I told them not to. Not because I badmouthed her. Because the absence registered as normal. Because Grandma was never reliably present to begin with. Before the snowstorm, there were the missed school plays. The canceled weekend plans. The "I'll be there" promises that turned into "something came up" texts 30 minutes before the event. Mason stopped expecting her around age 8. Lily never started. The snowstorm just made the pattern permanent. I didn't take their grandmother away. She was never fully there. I just stopped pretending she was. Mom called less. Then barely at all. The distance became the new normal and nobody fought it because fighting it would mean acknowledging the snowstorm and the sigh and the salon and the $340 Uber. And some truths are too ugly to confront, so families just let them calcify into silence until the silence is the relationship, and nobody remembers when the nothing started. They just know it's been there for a while, and the effort of excavating it is more than anyone wants to spend. 3 years. And then the text. Tuesday, 2:34 p.m. I was at my desk. My phone buzzed. Mom's name. First text from her in 5 months. Your dad had a heart attack. He's at General. Please come. I read it. I read it again. I stared at it for about 4 minutes. And then I typed, sorry, I'm busy. Call an Uber. I pressed send. I put my phone face down on my desk. And I went back to work. Mom called immediately. I didn't pick up. She called again. Left a voicemail. I listened to it once, standing in the break room with a cup of coffee. And her voice was screaming and crying simultaneously. This frequency that exists somewhere between rage and terror. And she said, this is your father. He could die. What is wrong with you? After everything, this is what you do? Call an Uber? Are you insane? She said call an Uber back to me like it was the most monstrous thing anyone had ever said. And I thought about a frozen highway and a 23% battery and a 6-year-old getting into a stranger's car, and I thought, yeah, it does sound monstrous when you're on the receiving end, doesn't it? I deleted the voicemail. Megan called 20 minutes later. More composed. Controlled. She said, Joel, Dad's in the hospital. He's in the ICU. I know things have been weird between you and Mom, but he's asking for you. I said, is Mom there? She said, yes. I said, then he's not alone. She said, Joel. I said, is that all? She went quiet. Then she said, you're really not going to come? I said, I'll think about it. I didn't want to think about it. I wanted to feel nothing. The way I felt nothing when the Uber receipt appeared on my screen 3 years ago, this cold mathematical nothing that processes events as numbers and not as emotions because the emotions are too expensive and the numbers are free. But I didn't feel nothing. I felt the specific, unwelcome pull of a son who still loves his father even when his father is married to a woman who chose a dog. Mom texted again that evening. How can you do this to your father? I replied with one message. The $340 Uber receipt. Screenshot. Dated. Timestamped. 3 years old. I'd kept it on my phone this entire time, in a folder labeled insurance. Not car insurance. Not life insurance. Emotional insurance. The receipt that proved what happened on the night my mother chose a grooming salon over her grandchildren. I attached it and typed. I called you from a highway in a snowstorm begging you to pick up your grandchildren, and you chose a dog grooming appointment. That's how. Sent. Uncle Ray called me that night. My dad's brother. He said, your mother says you're refusing to see your father. She says you've gone off the deep end. I said, did Mom tell you about the snowstorm? He said, what snowstorm? What snowstorm? 3 years. My mother had been carrying this story for 3 years, and she hadn't told anyone. Not Uncle Ray. Not Aunt Janet. Not the cousins. Nobody. The narrative in the family was that Joel pulled away for no reason and stopped coming to holidays and got weird about money. Nobody knew about the highway or the Uber or the dog or the sigh because my mother had erased the cause and left only the effect, and the effect without the cause just looks like a son who abandoned his family for no reason. I told Uncle Ray the story, start to finish. The highway, the temperature, the battery, the calls, the sigh, the grooming salon, the $340 Uber, the kids on the porch, the couch, the coats, Mrs. Chun, the $65 and the $340 side-by-side on the bank app. Uncle Ray was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, she never told us any of that. I said, I know. He said, Joel, go see your dad. I said, I'm thinking about it. The call an Uber text got screenshotted. By someone. I don't know who. It circulated through the family. My text to Mom. Her text asking me to come. My reply. Sorry, I'm busy. Call an Uber. Without context, it looks sociopathic. With context, it's a mirror. Some family members were horrified. Others, the ones Uncle Ray had called and told the snowstorm story to, went quiet. because the echo was too precise to be coincidence. Call an Uber, said to me during a snowstorm. Call an Uber, said back to her during a heart attack. The symmetry wasn't accidental. It was a receipt. I sent the full accounting to the family group chat the next morning. Not out of anger. Out of exhaustion. I was tired of being the villain in a story where I was the victim, and I was tired of the missing context, so I provided it. Everything. The $340 Uber receipt, dated and time-stamped. The $65 grooming charge, same day, same bank statement. The phone plan I'd been paying, $85 per month for 3 years, $3,060 total. The grocery delivery, $280 per month, canceled. The streaming, $42 per month, canceled. The life insurance change. The emergency contact removal. The total value of financial support removed over 3 years. Approximately $67,200 when you include the insurance beneficiary value. And at the bottom of the message, one sentence. My mother was 12 minutes from my children's school during a snowstorm, and she chose to watch a dog get groomed. Everything I've done since then is a consequence of that choice. The group chat went quiet. Not the silence of agreement or disagreement. The silence of a family seeing numbers for the first time that tell a story they'd rather not read. Dad recovered. Triple bypass. 2 weeks in the ICU. He called me from his hospital bed on a Thursday afternoon, and his voice sounded different. Not weak exactly, but honest in a way that hospital beds make people honest, stripped of the performance that healthy bodies allow. He said, "Your mother told me what happened. The snowstorm. The Uber. The kids on the porch. I didn't know, Joel." I said, "Nobody knew. Nobody asked." He said, "I'm asking now." I said, "It was 3 years ago, Dad." He said, "I know. And I should have asked 3 years ago. I should have noticed when you stopped coming to Christmas. I should have noticed when the kids stopped calling. I should have noticed a lot of things." He paused. "I'm sorry." I said, "I know." He said, "Will you come see me?" I went. Not for Mom. For Dad. I walked into the hospital room, and Mom was in the chair by the window. I didn't look at her. I walked past her like she was furniture, which is exactly how she treated my children on the night of the snowstorm. And I sat next to Dad's bed, and I held his hand, and we talked for an hour about nothing important and everything important simultaneously. The way conversations work when you're in a hospital room and the person in the bed almost died and the smallness of everything else becomes very clear very fast. When I left, Mom was still in the chair. She said, "Joel." I stopped in the doorway. She said, "I'm sorry about the snowstorm." First time. 3 years. 2 words that took 3 years to arrive. I said, "I know, Mom." And I left. I didn't forgive her. I know is not forgiveness. I know is acknowledgement. Forgiveness requires something to change, and the sigh I heard on that phone call didn't change. It just aged, and 3-year-old sighs don't become apologies just because someone finally says the word sorry in a hospital hallway. Megan called me the following week. She said, "I should have helped that night. I was home. I had the car. I could have gotten Bella from the groomer or driven to the school myself. I didn't think it was that serious." I said, "My kids were almost reported to CPS, Megan. A stranger drove them home. They sat on a porch in the cold. How serious did it need to be?" She was quiet. Then she said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Thank you." And I meant it, because Megan's apology, unlike Mom's, came with specificity. She named what she did wrong. She acknowledged the stakes. Mom just said, "Sorry about the snowstorm." Like the snowstorm was the problem and not the choice she made during it. I visited Dad twice more in the hospital. Each time I walked past Mom. Each time she tried to engage. Each time I responded with polite, minimal, surface-level words that gave her nothing to hold on to. I told Dad, on my second visit, sitting in the chair that Mom had vacated to go get coffee because she could feel that I wouldn't stay if she was in the room, "I'll be here for you, Dad. I'm not going anywhere. But I'm done being the emergency fund for a family that left my kids standing in the snow. The phone plan stays canceled. The grocery delivery stays gone. The insurance stays changed. I love you. But the math doesn't work anymore, and I'm not the one who broke it." Dad said, "I understand." And I think he did. A few months later, Mason, who's 12 now, asked me on a drive home from soccer practice why we don't see Grandma anymore. He said it casually, the way kids ask things that are enormous while looking out the window at nothing, and I thought about how to answer for about 6 seconds, which is a long time when you're driving and your son is waiting and the truth is complicated And the simple version isn't fair to anyone. I said, because Grandma made a choice once that showed me where we stand. And I made a choice too. He said, what choice? I said, I chose you. Every time. No matter what. You and Lily. That's the choice I made, and I make it every day, and I'll make it again tomorrow. He nodded. The way kids nod when they accept an answer that they'll understand more fully in 10 years. He went back to looking out the window. And I drove and I thought about a highway and a snowstorm and a sigh and a dog named Bella and a number, $340, that sits in a folder on my phone labeled insurance and will sit there forever, not because I need it anymore, but because some receipts you keep not for the refund but for the record. Proof that it happened. Proof that you survived it. Proof that you chose your kids over everything, every time, no matter what the weather. If you made it this far, thank you for listening.